And we're going to do our second part here of our first edition AD&D for new players. Last time we kind of gave you a kind of a little long-winded. I'll try to keep this one short. It's almost impossible sometimes, but the an overview of the different books you really got to get. We'll go in and get your hands on those original PDFs from the first edition. Some of the magic of the first edition. We talked a little bit about the core statistics and how they're a little different, and how some of them you need to have and some you don't. In this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the character classes. So let's just go ahead and take a look at let's get rid of this picture here, and let's see what we got here. Here's a little crappy little dungeon room we made. We've got some our tokens on the ground. We've got here's Mercedes, a fighter, and we've got a couple of orcs standing here. And if you know Mercedes, she would slaughter them wholeheartedly. But there's some details about this I wanted to talk about, and we'll use it in conjunction when we talk about the classes. So get your player handbook out if you hadn't got it already, and turn to page 14. And so this is when you first create a character. You say, hey, I want to play a fighter, just some two-handed sword or sword and shield, or use a huge halberd or a spear. You need to determine what race you want to be, and we'll briefly touch on the races, and then we'll go right into the fighter. So this episode will be mostly just talking about the fighter. We won't talk about the druid or assassin or anything else too much. And we'll do one episode for each class and what makes these classes amazing. So, we have this little shot here of this is a token I made for Mercedes before we bought some minis, and you have some nasty orcs here trying to crowd her around this well or this big fountain, right? So you could just replace that with the mini if you wanted to. So let's talk about the fighter and the race. So one of the things you're going to see right away is they say there's class level limitations. That doesn't sound very nice, does it? Why does there want to be a limitation on anything? Who wants to have that? You want to be able to be the highest level possible. Well, in the first edition, not many characters get beyond level 15. I think 20 was the max, or maybe 18. So what they're saying here is if you're playing a fighter, which race you pick kind of limits your max level. This is a rule that's kind of up to you. It depends what your world's about and what your campaign's about and what you want people to do and what kind of fun you want people to have. I don't have a problem with it real personally, but in this situation, if you're playing a dwarven fighter, you're maxed out to level 9. And it says, dwarven fighters less than 17 strength are limited to 7th level. So once they went down this route from a game design perspective, they realized, if that's the case, an elf certainly can't be higher than that. So level 7 is a limitation for an elven fighter with less than 17 strength. Those with less than 17 strength are limited to 5th level. Now then go back, think to Lord of the Rings, the old Tolkien books. It's like, come on. Some of the elves in the original book, they were not level 7 or level 5. So when we first started playing the game, we were big Lord of the Rings fans because there was an animated film that came out way before the live action movies happened. And that was our only point of reference. There really weren't any good novels, except for like Fritz Leiber stuff and some Conan books. We love Conan the Savage Sword or Conan the Barbarian. There was really no point of reference from a film perspective about what D&D could possibly be. So for us, we only had the Lord of the Rings. It was their closest match. And so for us, it's kind of like, what? Why are you going to limit everyone's level by what race they are? That didn't seem to make sense. So it's kind of up to you. You can even see here if you're going to play a fighter, level gnome, level to 6, and half elf level to 8, and halfling 6, and half orc 10, to humans unlimited. Well, it looks right away if you're going to play a human, you can do whatever you want. So a lot of players, when we started playing, wanted power because we're young players. We wanted power and prowess, so we always chose human players. Later on, we realized an elf used to get some bonuses for the long sword or the long bow, and you get some subtleties. So when you're playing a low-level campaign like the Village of Hamlet, which I highly recommend as a starter one because it's a beautiful village and lots of little simple dungeons, and it ultimately leads to the Temple of Elemental Evil, one of the classics. Really wonderful dungeon, really wonderful campaign, beautiful place. You could make those racial choices because they will give you a big advantage in your early days. When you're playing an illusionist, you're playing a gnome illusionist, you're going to be some limitations here. But what really to pay attention to is what classes couldn't be races. So you can't be a halfling magic user. Kind of reminds World of Warcraft. It used to be like, they changed it over the years. It used to be like you couldn't be a dwarf shaman or something like that. Well, you could be whatever it was. There was all kinds of limitations in some of the classes. You couldn't be a death knight unless you were a certain race and all that kind of business. So you couldn't be a druid if you're playing an orc or something. I can't remember. It's hard to remember. I think it was Tauren could be druids, but I think trolls couldn't. I can't remember the details. It's been so long. So they had some of these rules in place here. I actually recommend it in the beginning days that you don't start getting worried about this negativity of, oh gosh, I can't play a dwarf. I want to play a dwarf fighter that's just like Bruner Battlehammer. I don't want to be limited to level 9. I'm not doing that. Just throw this out. You can do whatever you want. These are suggested rules. One thing a lot of people get over fixated on is these rules were written a long time ago as a guide point for a game that kind of started around level 1 to 5, and level 7 and 8 were really powerful. But once they released the Giant series, which is G1, 2, and 3, which we're doing our show on, everyone's in G2 right now, and then the Descent into the Depths of the Earth from the Drow, they realized that players liked fighting demonesses like Lolth and having fights with big dragons and vampires. Suddenly characters are like level 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and they're carrying artifacts. So some of these original limitations are only really beneficial at the early days. And I think part of the reason was that is they kind of wanted some people to multi-class. And I'm not a huge multi-classing fan, but we'll talk about that later. So don't get too disappointed if you find out that being a gnome warrior, you're limited to level 6. And the footnote here, what does it say? Gnome fighters with less than 18 strength are limited to 5th level? I mean, come on. Everyone knows gnomes are cool. They can do whatever they want to do. So don't get bogged down with this. When you go down to the next section, you will see there's some ability score adjustments, and this is kind of interesting. This is where I think you should focus on this. So if you're going to play, say we're going to play that gnome warrior, right, just for a laugh. So gnomes, male or female, they have a minimum strength of 6, a max of 18 and 15. So they're being a little sexist here. I don't think you can just get rid of that in a modern world. This was done in 1978. They were discriminating against females. I mean, female dwarves couldn't have higher than 17 strength, and female elves couldn't higher than 16 strength. They're trying to keep it kind of World War II wargamey kind of feeling, where there's yin and yang choices. If you ever played Age of Empires, the Hittite archer versus the Syrian archers or whatever was very different. So you can pay attention to that to some degree. What I do think you should pay attention to is the maximum and minimum numbers for the race. And I think those make sense. Like halflings, let's look at a halfling, which is like a hobbit. Okay, they don't call them a hobbit in this because it's copyrighted. They could have a maximum dexterity of 18. You can have a max dexterity of 19 if you're playing an elf. If you're playing a half-orc, it's going to be 17. You know, but when it comes to wisdom, most people are pretty good, but a half-orc is limited. Or when it comes to playing intelligence, you know, some of these classes are limited. A half-orc could actually have 3 intelligence. It's real dumb. That's kind of fun. So when you make your racial choices, think about those kind of details. Read the descriptions, because inside here you're going to find subtle details that talk about things like, you know, for example, for dwarves, for their very nature, dwarves are non-magical and do not ever use magical spells. However, nature gives them a bonus with regards to their saving throws. So there's saving throw bonuses based on different races. So read through the races, and it's a few pages of it. You can realize that you're playing a dwarf. You'll be able to detect whether new constructions happened in a passage or a tunnel. That's a great thing to happen when you're in a dungeon. You can detect traps involving pits and falling blocks. Even if you're playing like a dwarf cleric, you could detect traps, right? So read the elf description here. It gives you bonuses. Elves have a 90% resistance to sleep and charm spells. So that's where the real interesting choices come in to play when you're choosing a race for your character. So choose a race based on these subtleties. Don't choose a race based on level limitations. Just throw that out the window, okay? They go to talk about gnomes, what their abilities are, how half elves work, halflings, which are really kind of hobbits. They even tell you that there's an entry in the monster manual, which we talked about before, which is this big bad boy book right here, right? You can go look up hobbits and halflings and half elves. They talk about half orcs and then humans. And then you get to some racial preferences. This was kind of weird. This was kind of taken, it's kind of a bad picture of all the races standing side by side, but it works from a functional perspective. You can see the height of a dwarf versus a human, and the height for the half-orc versus a human, and the height of an elf versus a half-elf. There's no gnome in the picture, ironically. But the table was kind of saying, well, elves, okay, elves and dwarves, how well they get along? Well, it has the letter A, right? So what does that mean? A means they treat their races greeted with antipathy, which is like an anger or hatred. So in this situation, elves and dwarves don't get along. They almost hate each other. So that's another thing that's kind of up to you in your world. These are all called humanoids. Anything that's a bipedal human creature like this, they're all called humanoids in the game. So you can play along with these details if you want. Like, you know, some are very, the considerably goodwill exists between gnomes and dwarves. And you know that T is for tolerate each other, and N is, what is this one right here? Shows the race is neutral, although suspicious. You know, those are kind of nice details, but you don't really need it. If your character has an interesting background, just go with that. So then you have a hit dice spell ability and class level limit. which is another thing that you should maybe throw out if you don't want to deal with it. So in this situation, they tell you when you're, this is the part to pay attention, is the hit dice type. This tells you what dice you would roll, one of them per level, to get your hit points. So if you're playing assassin or thief, it's a d6. So if you're a level 10 thief, the lowest you could have would be 10 health, and the highest you could have would be 60 without the constitution bonus. Magic users were d4. Oh my goodness. If you've never played the game in the old days and rolled the hit dice for your magic user, and you're a level 9 magic user and you rolled a bunch of 3s and you have 27 health, and when the fighter in your party has 87 health, you realize you're not a frontline fighter. It was kind of designed to be that way, but it's a little extreme. So this is really up to you. Like I suggested before, just max the hit points. Just give them the D number. Use the D number, like D10 for fighters and paladins, D8 for rangers. And then, but the maximum number of hit dice, this is kind of they call it a grognard. It's kind of like, are you really that literal with the rules? I never give this kind of limitation to them too much. I mean, you can just have, every level you get another hit die roll. Why not? Do they have spell abilities, yes or no? That's kind of up to you. Is there a level limit? Well, if you're playing a monk, they only get D4 health, and you'll see that with our characters in our adventure that we've been running. Let's see, let's pull those character sheets up. Where we go? Here we go. Let's check this out. Here's Eliphanisi, right? She only got 40 health. So she's level 10 monk. She's human. She's a tiger nomad. No constitution bonus for them, even though she has a decent constitution. Max health is 40. Okay? A comparable warrior, 132. That's a 3-to-1 ratio, where the monk has a lot of wonderful abilities and defenses to make up for it. They don't even wear armor. Their armor class comes from their monk abilities defensiveness. So they try to balance the classes. They are pretty balanced. So if you start looking for these types of things and trying to pick what you want to do, remember that, ask yourself like, well, I don't want to limit them by the level. Well, then don't do it. And if your DM says, hey, you can't have a gnome assassin this level too high, then you're going to need to conform to those rules. Most players just want to have fun. They don't want to run around quoting the rule book, if you know what I mean. No one likes a lawyer at the table. They even have, this table here is useful. It tells you what weapons they can use. So when you're playing a druid in the first edition, you can only use wooden shields. Okay, let's just take a look at a druid real quick. We have a druid in our party from our adventure. Let's see if we can do this. We get a little bit of lag here in the background. Where's my other PDF book? Here we go. I'm going to turn this background stuff off in the background. It'll give us some more frame rate. Let's kill that. All right, there we go. So we can get Felchurna, which is, I believe, Irish for little wolf. So here she is here, right? Here's her little mini and her little token. So, you know, for her, she can only use a wooden shield. In this situation, she's a maple shield. So pay attention to those details. I think those were really good choices. Club, dagger, dart, hammer, scimitar, sling, spear, and staff. That's something that persisted and maintained respect for the original class designs for years and years to come, even Pathfinder. If you look at the pictures of the heroic druid characters in Pathfinder, you see them wearing woodland clothing and only wearing leather armor and using wooden shields with a wolf next to them. And I think those things are great because that really is a character class. Sorry about the bump there. So with fighter, they can use anything. You also need to notice in first edition, you don't have all this like martial weapon proficiency, exotic weapon proficiency, specialization in rapiers, specialization ambidextrous in 2-weapon fighting. That was kind of where all the power gamer stuff entered into the third edition, which if you ever played Neverwinter Nights, the game from Atari years later and from BioWare, you could really take advantage of some of those things. I mean, the rapier was the most nastiest hit, threat range, crit range thing in the game. So third edition kind of suffered from over rules, and when you have too many rules, games have holes in them where no one uses a footman's flail, no one uses a morning star, everyone uses rapiers all the time because rapiers are critting from a 15 to 20. You don't have those rules in first edition. First edition are very straightforward. So just pay attention to things like if you're playing a monk, you know, what kind of weapons can you use? You can use hand axes. You could dual wield hand axes if you want to. Now, monk's going to do more damage and do more nastiness with their open hand attacks because of the stuns. But that's something to pay attention to. So in our characters, we have made sure that we conform to their weapon types. And since there's no rules about what weapon they can and can't use, we don't worry about that kind of stuff. So the first character in the book is the cleric, and then the second one is the druid, and then we get to the fighter. So let's talk about the fighter real quick, because that was supposed to be the main emphasis of this episode. So Mercedes, our example fighter, This is her. This is just a little mini for her. Her token with a bunch of orcs around her. We'll just get the druid off the scram. It's not your time to show off. So the fighter is just a good old-fashioned, straight-up, wear whatever armor you want, use whatever melee weapon you want, and you can dual wield whenever you want. Now, there used to be rules that said only the ranger could dual wield. That's one of the first things we've ripped out. No, no, no. You can dual wield if you want to. Why can't you dual wield? A lot of famous characters in history and in novels are dual wielding. Dritz Duerden, they say he's a ranger because he's dual wielding Twinkle and Icing Fang or whatever it is, his other sword. I don't have a problem with people dual wielding. The way the dual wielding works is your main hand is a -2 penalty. So say you had to say she doesn't really, but say she needed to hit this orc on a 10 and her main hand was this red die. So if she rolled an 8, we would take 2 away from it. That's actually a 1. So what you would do is you subtract the number off the die when you roll it. So and then the offhand has no penalty at all. So in this situation that would be a 9 she misses and a 3 she misses. You'll see me do that in the play sessions when we're playing. I'll always use Vrenjar. He's the only dual wielder in the whole group. You'll find that when he's an assassin, anytime we're doing dual wielding, that's how we get it to work. I'll pull his sheet up for you real quick. You can see this right here. There's a -2 dual wield main hand. There's no penalty for the offhand. So if you're picking a fighter, you're actually going to have a lot of freedom as what you want to do with that character. You're going to have a D10 for each hit dice number. You're going to be able to use any weapon you want. You'll be able to do any kind of armor you want. You can switch the sword and shield. You can pull out a longbow. A lot of versatility. You're a frontline knight if you want to. You can wear heavy armor. You can wear light armor. There's really no problem with playing the fighter at all. It's the most basic, fundamental melee fighter any human in history that fought on any battlefield from the classical era. If you ever play any board games from Warlord like Hail Caesar or Pike and Shot or anything like that, every single person on that battlefield is a fighter. There is no other classes, no rangers or anything like that. So the fighter is probably the most basic, rudimentally powerful class in the game. It's often the most overlooked class in the game. One thing about the fighter that's really fantastic is their chances to hit things are extremely high. When you do look up their hit tables in the Dungeon Master Guide, which we could probably find it for you relatively quickly here. Let's see if we can zip that forward for you. You'll find it like when they need to hit a number. Well, I'll tell you what, that's a faster way to do it. Let's just pull up Mercedes' sheet, right? Let's go to her. So this is Vrenjar. Here's Mercedes, and here's Zolaris. Both level 12 fighters. She's level 12, lawful neutral. He's level 12, chaotic neutral. This is the alignment. To hit AC 0, he needs a 6. Okay? So if he's running, that's because of his magical weapon, of course, as well. He has a +4 burning glaive, but he doesn't have a bonus to hit from his strength. You see this number here, 16 strength. He only has a little bit of bonus from his bonus to damage because of his strength. For Mercedes, she's the same thing. Only 16 strength. There's no bonus to damage to hit. So, she's rolling to hit something, and this is already taken into consideration here, this number here, to make it faster. That makes it pretty easy. And she's going to hit something that's armor class 4, okay? You take that to hit AC 0, and you subtract 4 from it, because this is a number to beat. Now, they've always kept that mechanic, all the D20 games. When you have a roll to hit number, you got to roll higher than that on a D20. So let's just say that Mercedes was trying to roll to hit. Let's put something else on the screen. Let's get rid of these dumb orcs. Let's say she's fighting a stone giant, right? And she's rushing in the room, the stone giant. She's going face to face with this guy. So let's say the stone giant was armor class -2, just like she is. So what does she need to hit AC 0? She needs a 6. So we need to add 2 to that. That means she needs an 8. So on a D20, 14, she's got a hit, no problem. So that's pretty good. Now think about this in terms of percentages, right? So if a 20 is 100%, a 10 is 50%, right? So if you look at, I can't even find the 10 on here. If you only need a 6, okay, each one of these is 5. That means that you have it's a 30% chance to miss. She's a 60% chance to hit AC 0. And so as the armor class gets higher, that percentage, every number on the D20 die is another 5%. So they hit things really, 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 really well. And you can compare that real quickly to the illusionist. Okay, this is not a fighter. To hit AC 0, she needs a 16, 10 numbers higher. It's 50% harder for an illusionist. So we just put obscure here. She's trying to come in and hit something with a dart or a little hand crossbow or hit it with her hand or jam it with her staff. And she's not supposed to be doing that. She's supposed to be casting spells. But she may have an attack where she needs to touch something like burning hands or something and do damage. Her chance to hit the same enemy is much worse. So the game is balanced all around those tables to hit and the fighter probably has one of the best to hit tables of any class in the game. So if you want to play something that lands damage a lot and is consistent sustained damage, the fighter is the best one to go with. Here's those tables I was talking about. So you see this first one up here. This is for clerics, druids, and monks. So if you're going to play a cleric, a druid, or a monk, so in our party we have Antola as a cleric, we have Filcherna, who's a druid, and we have Eliphanisi. Even though she's a martial character, she's a monk. All three of these characters have the same base number to hit. So you can look at their character sheets and see the only thing that's modifying that is her weapon. So she has a +2 Moonlight Scimitar, so she needs a 12 to hit AC 0. If we look at Antola, he only needs a 10 because he has a +4 flail. You can see he's got 2 more bonus to hit. If you go to Eliphanisi, she's using open hand attack, so she has no bonus to hit, so she needs a 14. So the numbers are different because of the gear, but otherwise they're all exactly the same. They all need that same number to hit AC 0. They're all around level 10, so they all need this 14. See the 14 right here? But then when you look down here to a fighter, let's say you're a level 10 to 12 fighter, okay, you hit AC 0. Let's see, your attack for fighters, paladins, bards, etc. Their base number is only a 12. So it's easier for them. You go to magic user and illusionist to hit AC 0, and you're level 11 or 12 or 10, you need a 19 or 16. And for thieves, assassin, theirs is pretty good, but not as good. So it kind of goes like this. Like fighters are number 1, fighters, paladins, rangers, and bards, which is kind of ironic that bards got thrown on this table. Usually thieves and assassins come second, and then druids come third, and then magic users and illusionists go last, if I'm not mistaken. So a good way to compare that is also notice the ranges. So for cleric and druid, level 7 and 9, and on an assassin is level 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 12. So the assassin when they hit level 9 is 12, and he's a 16. If you're playing a druid, you only need a 16, but as soon as you get to level 10, you only need a 14. So to get to 14 for the assassin and thief class, you got to get all the way to level 13. So it balances out. They balance that out also with how much experience it takes to get to that level. So in a nutshell, when you're picking your character class, if you want something that nails things, that hits for a lot of damage, and has the freedom to do any kind of weapon they want, the fighter only takes this one column. Okay, this is all you need to know about playing a fighter. So all you got to do after that is just pick your weapon, envision your character to be whatever you want it to be, and just run with it. And one thing I always encourage people to do is like, hey, listen, if you're going to play a fighter, look through all the great weapons and look how much damage they do against small and medium targets and large targets. Pick something hefty and powerful. Pick something with character. Don't go down here and say, yeah, I want my fighter to use hammers and javelins. I mean, you're not going to do a lot of damage hitting things with a 2 to 5 damage hammer against an orc. But if you get your chance to hit something with a two-handed sword, even a bastard sword does 2 to 8. A two-handed sword is going to do 1 to 10, just 3 to 18 against giants. So in this situation here, and that's one thing that makes the fighter better. If she lands a hit on this storm giant, she's going to do 3d6 damage base, right? So her damage right off the bat, what is this? 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12? That's 12 damage right off the bat. If she was using, let's pick another weapon, right? Pick a crap weapon. Let's say she was using a dagger, okay? Against a giant, it only does, what is that, 1 to 3? I mean, how would you even roll that? You'd have to just roll 1d6 and divide it by 2. So that's a 2. So using a dagger, it's a really cool weapon for rogues to use in World of Warcraft. 3 to 18 damage versus 1 to 2? I don't think so. So that's the thing about the fighter. Focus on powerful, heavy-hitting weapons or ones with long reach. So, for example, Zalaris, let's put him up on the screen for you. He's using a glaive. The advantage that comes for him every now and then is he can reach things and do thrusting attacks from further away. So each one of these squares on the screen is a 5-foot square, and each character takes up one of these squares. The giants are about 1.5 squares each. Notice how the token is tangent to that. He can actually hit this giant from an additional 5 feet away because he's actually got this huge polearm. So unless the giant's fleeing or run the other way. So he doesn't have to be right on top of him. Another thing to think about is when you're picking a weapon, think about what it's like to swing the weapon. What kind of attacks would you do with it? So one thing you may have seen in some of our episodes is Mercedes comes in and she's taking a swipe, and there's enemies on her flank like this, right? So I'll make her do a roll to hit, and if she does a side swing, she could swing in a fan like this at real heavy two-handed sword and maybe hit both of these enemies simultaneously. I'll make her make a roll a hit in the first one and then just do another roll in this one to see if it's double damage. I'll let her hit the second target. If you ever played Conan, one of the MMOs, it kind of died off over the years. I think they're did an Unchained free-to-play version. In that game, you're always hitting everything on screen at once. And I think in some of the other action games like Terra, you hit everything on screens in front of you. So when you're playing a fighter, think about what weapon choices you want to have. You could be a fighter and just use a bow the whole time if you wanted to. Use a bow and use dual-wield hand axes or dual-wield rapiers. So it's your opportunity to use character and personality and make them come alive. And the good thing is, if you're going through a dungeon and you pick up some kind of giant slayer sword, like was in the setting of the Hill Giant Chief, switch to that. So just keep that roll, the hit number, as low as possible. If you ever play Baldur's Gate, you know what it's like to sit there and play and fiddle with your inventory and try to get the lowest number you possibly can for your roll to hit so you can just power drive through things, because that game's actually quite hard, even on easy mode, okay? So that's pretty much it for the fighter. Next up, we'll probably talk about the cleric, and we'll see you back in a few minutes.